The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Welcome to Garden Connections. I'm your host, Stephanie Passingham. On today's show, we're going to start by finding out if our garden soil has all the ingredients it needs to grow good plants this season. We'll be taking a soil sample and sending it off to Frontier Labs in Clear Lake, Iowa. Then we'll follow it there to find out the results. We'll also be joined by Amy Whitaker, a former host of Garden Connections, and she'll be joining us to talk about bulbs. We'll talk about spring bulbs and fall bulbs and plants we think are bulbs but aren't really. I hope you'll stay with us on Garden Connections. Today we are in our very own community garden plot. We're part of the Austin Community Gardens located on the southeastern side of town. And if you'd like to do something like this, maybe your backyard isn't very big, be sure to contact your city hall and they may have this opportunity available for you as well. One of the first things we're going to do with our plot is we're going to have the soil tested. And we do this because we want to make sure that the soil contains all the essential nutrients that our plants will need to grow and be successful for this year. So what we're going to do is take several samples from different spots in the garden and send them into a soil testing lab. One of the first things we want to do is to clear the surface of debris. We don't want to be sending into the lab any of this old vegetative matter, any grass or anything. So you kind of want to clear that spot. And then you want to go down about 12 inches. That's sufficient for most garden plants, that root zone that we'll want to be knowing what the nutrients are in our soil. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of dig a V-shaped hole. And then we want to take our plastic tote. We're going to put our soil sample in a plastic tote because we don't want to contaminate the sample by using a metal container. So they always recommend using plastic. So we're just going to take a little slice here. And we're going to put that in our sample. Now we're going to move to another location and take a sample there and a third location and mix them all up. The next thing you want to do is once you have your 3 samples in your bucket, you do want to kind of pull out some of the stray weeds and things that came in with your shovel. So try to get rid of as much of that as you can. A few extras. And then you want to mix up the dirt. You want a uniform sample from your garden area. Again, our plot is about 15 by 20, so 3 holes was sufficient. If you have a much larger garden, you'd want to take more samples spread throughout the area. So then you just want to mix it up. You want to follow the specific instructions that is provided by the lab that you select, but in our case, Frontier Lab said that they would need about 1.5 cups to 2 cups of our sample to test. They also suggested that we put it in a simple freezer storage bag type bag. Anyone that you can find is good. Sometimes Extension Services will send out little paper bags, so use whatever they are recommending. I labeled it KSMQ Garden Connections, so they know this belongs to us. All right, so that's enough to send. Zip it up. And we'll send it off and we'll be checking on our results in about 4 days. Today we're here in Clear Lake, Iowa at Frontier Labs, and we're with Rich Finstead, who is the president of the company, and he's going to tell us the results of our test. And I'm so excited to hear about those, Rich. But I want you to start by first telling us why gardeners should actually have their soil tested.
Well, there's so many things that can go wrong in a garden. When you start a crop, there's more living material in that garden than there is people on the earth. So we have to also feed them, and then that requires various pHs, it requires nutrients and all those things. So it's extremely important.
And how common is it for soils to be out of balance?
Very common, especially in western Iowa, western Minnesota. We have so many very, very high pHs, and we have to deal with them and bring them down in order to grow the best garden.
Okay. And how often should a gardener have their soil tested?
We normally recommend farmers to do it every 4 years, but a gardener on a smaller scale, I think every 2 years would be a good idea.
And what are we looking for? Give us a sense of kind of the macronutrients and the micronutrients that we'll be looking for in a test.
The first thing we'll look for in a soil sample is the pH. If we don't have proper pH, no matter how many nutrients you have, they still aren't going to work.
What about smaller micronutrients? How important are they?
If we're having, they're extremely important because no crop will grow any better than the element that's in least supply. And that's what we do in soil testing, is trying to find that element that's in least supply, and then we can build it up and make the garden produce a lot better.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's take a look at an example, kind of an abbreviated example of what you did with our dirt when we sent it to you.
First thing we do at the lab is we dry the sample so it becomes powder dry. And then we grind it so it's about like sugar, a little coarser than that maybe. Okay. And the reason we take such a good sample at this part is when we get to this field, that's how much sample we take to test your garden once it gets at the lab.
That's it.
2 grams.
So you take all of these pieces or the chunks that we sent you and you grind it even finer.
Yep.
And you take, how about, is that like a half a teaspoon?
Yeah, I'd say half a teaspoon. It's 2 grams.
2 grams, okay.
At one time, we thought that an acre was a weight, so we tried to proportion everything on a balance. Later on, they said, no, an acre is a volume of soil because sandy soils weigh different than peat soils do.
Sure.
So we now use the scoop, so we're actually figuring everything back to this volume. Wow. This is a certain percent of an acre. Okay. And that's how we make our recommendations.
Let's show folks what it looks like empty. So it's just really shallow. It's a tiny little scooper. All right. So then you've got this little scoop of dirt. Then what do you do?
Then we pour it into these bottles. You can pour it right in that first one.
See if I can get it in there. You hire me as a lab assistant there.
There we go.
All right.
And then we'll mix solutions that have been studied for a long time, like the phosphorus solution is a Bray solution. We mix the solution in here, put it on a shaker that just shakes the sample for 5 minutes.
Okay.
And then gets the solution all mixed up really well. Then we'll bring it inside the lab and we'll pour the solution back into here. The liquids all drip through into the bottom of the test tube, and that's the portion that we do test.
And do you put that under a microscope, or what kind of tools do you use to test that?
It's various tools we use. For the pH, we use a pH meter, where we can just stick the electrode into the solution, and it actually reads out the pH is 6.5. If it's less than 7, we know it's acid. If it's more than 7, it's an alkaline soil, and that's how we deal with that.
Okay, and so you only need one little test tube of this solution from our soil to read all of those tests.
Right, we use several just to speed up the process so we can do the pH at the same time as we do the P's and the K's. But it takes the same amount of soil to do each test.
All right, isn't that interesting? Because we mixed up all those samples and then we thought we were sending you a fairly small representation of that, and then you take that tiny little half teaspoon. All right.
And the key to it is a sample. If we don't get a good sample, we can't give you a good result.
Sure.
And then from that sample, we take subsamples, and once it's in this state, ground and dried, we can do a real good job of sampling.
All right, very good. And so that is the last step. You test that, and then you print out this great little report.
That's correct.
All right. So the big reveal. How's our dirt?
You were very lucky. Your sample came out about ideal for garden.
Oh, really good.
First thing we looked at was the pH, and it's 6.97 is perfect. 6.5 to 7 is perfect. And you're right on the money. Your organic matter was 5.3, which means it can hold a lot of water and produce a pretty good garden if we get a rain now and then.
Okay.
The phosphorus is 38. Anything over 30 is really good. So you're good, and it might caution you here. When you get a soil sample back and it's 38, you probably shouldn't apply any more phosphorus because it's subject to running off and getting into streams and surface waters.
Right.
And
so we don't need any more.
And that's where the algae grow in our lakes and streams, so extremely important. And then our potassium says it's 161, which is about perfect for a garden.
Okay.
And the trace elements all appear to be really good too, so you've got a good garden.
So we're in good shape. We don't really need to add anything.
That's right.
So now we know that we have some pretty decent dirt in here. We know that we don't need to add too many other things. What are the most common deficiencies in soils in our area? What would most gardeners maybe want to consider if they didn't have their soil tested? They might want to consider applying to their garden.
I'd put on just a small rate of nitrogen. If you get too much nitrogen, it causes more vegetative growth and less fruits. So you got to be really careful not to over nitrogen a garden.
Okay.
And then it gets stemmy and stocky, and you don't like that.
Lots of greenery, but
looks nice, but doesn't produce good and doesn't taste good.
Okay.
And then there's if you need lime, you can just buy regular lime or go to a lime quarry and get it. It's relatively cheap and often neglected because normally we don't need much lime.
And lime is to balance the acids in the soil.
Right.
Kind of mellow it, they say.
Yep. If the soil gets a little too acid, why the bacteria in the soil don't grow good and the plant nutrients aren't taken up nearly as well, so we want to lime first.
Okay. Now this whole process, you walked us through it kind of in an abbreviated fashion. How long does it take when the sample comes to you, comes in the door? About how long is that process?
We generally get a sample in by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We go to the dryer, take it out of the dryer about 2 o'clock in the morning, grind it, bring it out, and it gets tested the next day. So about a 24-hour process.
All right, sounds good. Well, very fascinating. I'm excited that our dirt is in pretty good shape for the year. Rich, thank you so much
for helping us out. Enjoyed having you here.
Sounds good. Well, it looks like we are off to a good start. Stay tuned for more Garden Connections. Bulbs are a favorite of many home gardeners, whether you have a large backyard to plant great big beds of flowers, or whether you are a container gardener or have just a small patio and you plant them in containers. Well, we have a special guest today. Amy Whitaker is a former host of Garden Connections, and she is joining us to explain the world of bulbs to us. Welcome back to the program, Amy.
Thank you. It's nice being back.
All right, great. Well, let's talk about bulbs. There are many kinds, and then some that really aren't bulbs that we think are. Help us understand this.
Yeah, most gardeners see anything that's a large object that you use to plant and grow flowers as a bulb, you know, rather than a seed. If it's not a seed, it's a bulb. But technically, a lot of the things that are sold as bulbs are not true bulbs.
Okay.
A true bulb, as in garlic, has the paper sheath but is segmented. Another bulb would be a lily. You can see the distinct segments within the bulb that kind of break apart and peel off.
They look very similar, don't they?
Yep, so that would be considered a true bulb.
And interesting to note that bulbs don't always have to be flowers. We can eat them too.
Yes, you can eat many different kinds of bulbs as well.
Okay.
From there we move on to a corm. Now this is a tulip corm, often known as a bulb, but the technical term is a corm. It does not have the segmentation. It is a solid single piece with just the paper sheath for protection.
Okay.
And then we also have tubers. Now tubers can be modifications of a stem or a root. The bulb and the corm are both considered modifications of the plant stem. So these are where the stem has stored extra energy for the plant to grow from.
And there's actually a root coming out from that.
Yep, yep. And as far as tubers go, there are root tubers and stem tubers.
Okay.
Dahlia happens to be a root tuber where it is actually parts of the root that have expanded, not the stem. So all of those are different kinds of items we may find that are generally considered bulbs, but are not technically all a true bulb.
Okay, all right. Well, let's talk a little bit. Another way that people often think of bulbs is the season in which they're planted. You've got spring and fall. What's the difference between those, and why is it important to plant them in season, if at all possible?
Fall bulbs need a cold treatment in order to flower. They need a certain period of time at a certain set temperature, usually anywhere from 38 to 45 degrees or even cooler, to induce that flower formation. If they don't get that cold treatment, they will still grow green, but they won't flower.
Okay, and that's something like a tulip. A tulip would be a fall bulb. What else do you put in the fall?
Hyacinth and daffodils are probably the other most common.
Most common ones. Okay. Show us how you would recommend putting perhaps tulips, maybe one in each one of these, for someone who wanted to plant them inside and enjoy them instead of out in their garden.
All right.
And this is a container that's, what, probably 4 or 5 inches deep?
Yep.
And that's sufficient for a bulb of this size, right?
Yes, when it comes to bulbs in containers versus bulbs in the ground, when they're in the ground, it is best to get them to the proper depth, the appropriate depth for the bulb, because they're going to be there permanently. Ideally, you're not going to be digging them up from year to year.
And that's with those fall bulbs, right? You just leave them in.
Yep, any of the fall bulbs that you can leave in that are hardy from year to year, you want them planted at the optimum depth to make sure they're not going to come up too early in the spring, the soil's had enough time to warm, all those kind of technical things. But when you're growing them in a container, most often your container, number one, isn't going to be deep enough, and number two, it's not going to be a permanent home for the bulb. So being that it's not permanent, you can plant them shallower and still be successful.
And still enjoy them.
Yep. So in here, we can go a little shallower. So I would put just a slight layer in the bottom, maybe an inch or so. Just enough to get it snugged in there.
Okay. And the soil that you would use for container gardening?
You can use any soilless potting mix or a potting mix with soil in it. It really doesn't make too big of a difference as long as it's well drained. If they sit in soil that is too wet for a prolonged period of time, they will end up with rotting problems. And so when you plant, you just always want to make sure you've got your roots facing down and your sprout up, because if you plant them upside down, they will not grow. So just kind of snug them in there. So they're just kind of snugged into the centers of the pots. Give them plenty of room to grow. And we don't want to cover them up real tight. We want to leave it a little loose. So we're not going to pack them in. We're just going to kind of fill it up and pat it down so that that bulb doesn't get jammed up in the soil as it's trying to push through.
Okay, and so let's be optimistic and think that these will flower this year. When they're done, then what do I do with them?
Then you can actually pull them out and plant them right in your garden.
Okay.
Or you would want to leave the green on them for as long as you can so that it can recharge the bulb. Pull them out and store them in your refrigerator for over the winter months, or just leave them in their pot. You can just leave them in the pot and stick it in the refrigerator once all that green foliage has died off, and then start the cycle all over again for forcing.
All right. Let's take a look at, you have this dahlia here. Is this planted in the same way? And again, this is a spring bulb. Can you start them in the pot in the spring as well, or again, do these have to go out in the ground?
You can do these in a pot or in the ground. The biggest difference is between the fall and the spring is that they cannot handle cold most of the time. Most of the time, these are more tropical plants that are not able to live through the winter freeze. You only want to plant them to the depth that they've been planted in the past. You don't want to go any deeper. Being that these are a root modification, but iris are also a rhizome of the stem. You don't want to bury them too deeply.
So it would be here, or?
Yep, they had been buried about to here. Yep, you just want to cover the tuber.
Sounds
so we
good.
want to go probably even more in the pot there.
In there. Okay.
Yep.
How's that? Something like that?
Yep, something like that. Looks good.
Okay.
And with these, you want to try to spread them out because these are what allow the plant to multiply. So as they spread, you'll get more sprouts that come out off to the side. So if you plant them straight down, your sprouts aren't going to be able to move up and around and start. So,
so give them a little room.
Yep, give them some room.
That pot's almost too small, perhaps.
Yeah, we're only probably going to get one good shot in here, but you'll still get multiple sprouts out of it.
So something like that. We'll get another scoop of dirt in there.
Scoop it in a little more. You want them covered, but not deep. So here we have them covered, but I can still feel them just underneath the soil in the pot.
Okay, now our soil is fairly moist. Do you want to water these?
I wouldn't water them any more than what it is because it is quite moist. If it was dry soil, you would want to saturate them well once and then kind of let them dry a bit in between waterings. Being that they've got all that energy stored up, they're not like a seedling that's going to need constant water. They've got plenty of energy and food and a little bit of moisture saved in there that if you overwater, you have more tendency to make them rot.
To rot, okay.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at this. This is an old Easter lily that I got last year. Forgot all about it. Left it on my kitchen windowsill. And lo and behold, this spring here comes. But the one thing I noticed about it is there were little ones to go with it. Do all bulbs multiply in this way? And let's go ahead and take this out. You can show us what has actually happened inside this.
All bulbs do multiply in some way, shape, or form. So these plants will still produce seeds, but bulbs are going to be the fastest way to propagate them. Now, like in the case of tulips or corms, on the very bottom in the root area, they will start to produce cormals. Very, very small little corms that will over time grow and eventually be able to produce a flower. Now these, it'll probably be 3 to 5 years before you'll get a bloom off of them. But you'll notice, like when you dig them up, if you're ever digging to move them, that you may end up with multiple larger bulbs almost kind of stuck together. And that's from these corms.
Okay, and it's okay to break those apart and plant them separately? Okay.
It is very okay to thin them out. They actually benefit from being dug up and thinned out every now and again. That elongates the life of your original bulbs so they don't get crowded out. And allows them to just keep reproducing and growing.
Okay. So let's take a look at this lily and see what's in that pot. Now, since this didn't benefit from cold over the winter, it sat on my kitchen windowsill all winter long. Didn't look like it was even still alive. Oh, look at this root now.
Yep. Easter lilies do also need a cold period to bloom, but they are a hardy bulb for our area. So you can plant them out once if you've gotten it as a gift for Easter, once you're done having it inside and it's done blooming, you can plant it outside and it will continue to grow green through the summer. It won't bloom again the first year. But once it's had that first winter cold treatment, it will come up and it will bloom again, usually around the 4th of July.
In July?
Yep.
So it won't be an Easter lily anymore?
Nope, it'll be just a regular
Now
lily.
This is a little...
Now that one almost looks like it started from a seed, or lilies do make nice little bulbils, are what they're called. They're little black bulbs that actually form over time in the attaching area of the leaf. So right where the leaves attach, you'll notice that there are little black bulbils on there. And those will actually fall in and grow plants.
And grow plants like this.
Again, faster than seed, but not as quickly as the bulbs themselves.
So let's see if the rest of this...
Where they came up from.
Yep. Boy, it's all stuck together here.
It's got some...
Oh, look at that.
Okay, so that was probably your original parent bulb.
Okay.
And then it sent off all these nice little bulbs to the sides. So these are the little bulbs that it sent off.
Okay. And these new ones, again, because of cold treatment, they won't actually flower this year probably.
Nope. Okay.
But I can go ahead and plant them outside and we'll have them for next year.
Yep. And usually, something this size, it may be 2 or 3 years yet before it's built up the energy to be able to bloom. But you've got all your little bulbs that came off of your original parent bulb that's still down in here somewhere. So there's all kinds of them coming out. And what the parent bulb does is once a segment is mature, it'll break off on its own and start its own.
One of those.
Yep, start its own little bulb.
All right. And because Easter lilies, you know, we think of them in March and April, how have they gotten them, how have they forced those bulbs to bloom out of season? What's not traditional for a bulb?
As with any bulb, you can plant it up at any point in time and then give it the cold treatment that is required to make it bloom. So you can grow bulbs during any season.
Okay.
The fall bulbs. We're talking cold treatment. So
okay.
the fall bulbs
Okay.
you can grow in any season. You just make sure that they're good and healthy. Ideally, give them some sort of fungicide treatment to keep them from rotting in those moist, cool conditions.
Okay.
Pot them up and then store them for the term that they need cold treatment.
Okay.
And then pull them out,
Pull
put
them
them
out.
someplace nice and bright and water. And
So an Easter lily would be pulled out in January typically? Is that enough time, January to March or April, depending on when Easter falls?
yes, I'm trying to remember my college days. I believe they need about 12 weeks.
About 12 weeks. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Very
So.
good. Well, bulbs are a fascinating plant. They're beautiful flowers, and as we learn, can be edible as well. Amy, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge about bulbs with us today.
No problem. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, well, I hope you've enjoyed this edition of Garden Connections and learned something. I certainly have. I hope you'll join us next time. I'm your host, Stephanie Passingham.
On Garden Connections, we'd love to see photos of your garden. Or if you have questions for our garden experts, contact us by emailing garden@ksmq.org or like us on Facebook.